This implies that my approach may be a combination of the three methods, inasmuch as I am convinced of their validity. I do not dispense with form criticism, historical criticism, knowledge of canonical and apocryphal texts, orthodox and heterodox interpretations, and the like. At the same time, I do not accept the hunter epistemology of researchers who imagine themselves without any presupposition and shoot at anything that moves. Nor do I proceed pietistically or from a sentimental vision of Jesus and a one-sided evaluation of history. Christian history is not a model of righteousness. Our question is not pure speculation nor a mere theologumenon. For me to be a Christian means to have encountered Christ personally, and to be a philosopher or theologian, if one so prefers, means thinking critically about this experience in this case. The authentic Christian is not so much the follower of an ideology or the believer in the belief of others, but the one who has encountered the reality of Christ. Without this encounter, it all remains a superstructure, adhyasa. The meaning of any Christian sacrament, according to Orthodox formulation, is an encounter with Christ. Let us not forget that the grace of Christ is Christ himself, and that the opus operatum of Catholic theology is not magic, but the opus operantis Christi. Now, this encounter is all pure imagination, or a mere meeting of ideas, or perhaps ideals if it is not a meeting of persons, a personal encounter, i.e., a meeting in the deepest core of our existence, an encounter which embraces all of our being. Many mystics say of falling in love, but all this would remain an illusion if this encounter were not possible. If the true Christ were only a figure of the past, or a construction of our fantasy, or at best a remembrance of something gone by, the encounter is not with the Messiah, or Son of the living God, recalling the Petrine Confession, Matthew 16:15, but with the You, Thou art, of Christ. In brief, this encounter is feasible if communication and communion is possible in that deepest core of our being, the person. Here we have another example of what I call the circulus vitalis against the circulus vitiosus, the vital breakthrough against the vicious begging of the question. It could well be that we have such an idea of person because we have gone through this experience of a personal encounter. At any rate, we say that this encounter is personal because person is precisely this type of relationship. An isolated individual, if it were to exist, would not be a person, yet person is our most intimate reality, the most mysterious. It is incommunicable because it is already communion. Here is where I should apply to myself the theory of the pistuma. It is easier to speak of it in the third person. I cannot describe the meaning of Durga for a believer in Durga if I do not research the pistuma of the believer, which may be different from the pneuma of the onlooker. Similarly, I will not give a proper description of Jesus Christ if I put in epoche my belief in that symbol. In confessing my belief, I shall automatically avoid any possible absolutization such as believers in reason are often prone to make when they speak of pure reason. I will constantly remember that it is my belief. All this needed to be clarified at the outset because it both justifies and relativizes the choice of texts. The choice of the three texts, or groups of sayings, shows already a certain preference. I could defend the choice by saying that Christian tradition has considered them to be central, but here again this understanding of tradition depends already on an option, even if it follows the historical routine of what scholars call the Great Church. I am sufficiently aware of the dark historical facets and maneuvers of that church so as to be able to overcome such a routine. The texts are certainly not the only ones which one could choose, but they yield a certain picture of the mystical experience that the man Jesus Christ may have had according to tradition, notwithstanding value judgments of any type on exegetical remarks situating and grading the texts. My comments claim to be valid even if the historical Jesus did not utter those words or was not the second person of the Trinity. I take him to be at any rate a prototypos of the human condition. It should be clear by now that if I speak of experience and of encounter with Christ, this cannot be a meeting with a Jesus of the past. It would then be merely remembrance or hallucination. By saying this, I am in no way ignoring the immense work of exegetical analysis, nor am I contesting traditional orthodoxies. I am not even attempting to situate Jesus Christ in an Asian context, saying, for instance, that he is the Sadguru, the or a Jivanmukta, the supreme Satyagrahi, Advaitin or Yogi, the incarnate Prajapati, Chit, highest avatara, Adipurusha, divine Shakti, tempeternal Aum, or the like, nor am I comparing Christ with key figures in other religions. Having delved into most of those subjects elsewhere, I am trying here a much humbler, although riskier enterprise, a personal exercise in what the ancients said, fide quærens intellectum, convinced as I am that faith is the life of man, Habakkuk 2:4, Romans 1:17, Galatians 3:11, Hebrews 10:38, or that faith is the way to liberation, Upadeshashtari 1:1. If you do not believe, you will not survive or understand, says another traditional interpretation of a probably more down-to-earth original Hebrew text, Isaiah 7:9. Having said this much, I discover immediately that I am not alone either in the experience or in the interpretation of it. In fact, most of the genuinely mystical interpretations of Christ point in the same direction. There is also a revealing similarity with the affirmations of scores of philosophers and sages from other traditions, without affirming now that they all say the same, as of a Kantian thing in itself. Be this as it may, it is further worth pointing out that although Christianity claims to be based on the person of Jesus, except for some ontological and cosmological interpretations of Jesus Christ during the first centuries, the councils of Nicaea, Chalcedon, and Constantinople being the most representative, most Christian self-understanding is based on the historical narratives of the words and actions of Jesus, as interpreted by tradition, rather than one's own personal consciousness. We should recall once again the almost unanimous tradition of most religions that faith or initiation is required for the authentic study of sacred doctrines. However, in the modern Christian tradition there is a strong wind of objectivity which has dispelled the mystical awareness and blown it to the outskirts of Christian life. The Christic faith, which began as a religiousness of the word, evolved more and more sociologically speaking into a religion of the book, intelligenti pauca. Whoever that young rabbi might have been, or whatever self-consciousness he might have had, the important and decisive thing was supposed to be the belief in what had been written down about him, not only in the first canonical documents, but also in the subsequent conciliar and for some even papal writings. And to be sure, in spite of many divergent ideas, there is a certain consensus in acknowledging what he did and said. All the problems seem to have been solved for a time by saying that he was the Son of God, or at any rate an extraordinary prophet, an instrument of the divinity for a cosmic and historical role. In a word, his function, his doctrine, his example seem to be what really matters. Christian faith became almost synonymous with acknowledging a set of facts and doctrines. The living figure of Jesus Christ was wrapped around and protected by a heavy doctrinal garb, like those traditional South European Madonnas almost buried under heavy vestments, jewels, and flowers. The recent Roman Catholic Catechism seems to be a case in point. I am contesting neither the legitimacy nor the truth contents of those belief systems. I am only undertaking another pilgrimage, or rather trying to be a fellow traveler on the human path, who this time has unloaded his rucksack. To put it differently, it is customary today to speak about a Christology from above, in contrast to a Christology from below. I shun labels, but if at all I would call this study a Christology from within, well knowing that the reign of the heavens is entos, neither among nor inside, but between us. For this reason I am submitting my experience to the dialogue and critique of the us, the you of the community. One did not need to be over-curious over the man Jesus, since he was considered to be ultimately a divine being. This attitude was understandable as long as the Christian emphasis was on theocentrism. Jesus remained simply an instrument of God. He raised him from the dead. He inspired him regarding what to say and what to do. He was behind him when performing miracles. After all, Jesus said that he came to do the will of the Father, and that he spoke only what the Father wanted him to say. Listening to him, the Christian obeys the will of God. What else do we need? Is it not unhealthy curiosity to scrutinize what the man Jesus felt and experienced, apart from what he plainly said and did? We should not forget this warning. We may feel the need of psychoanalyzing Jesus. We cannot forbid to do this, and it is legitimate. Yet we should then not speak of his mystical awareness, but of his psychological makeup. This is all the more an important caution because the increased interest in psychology, the weakening of a certain image of God, and the growing fascination with the Christ figure outside ecclesiastical precincts seem to justify this desire to know about the man Jesus and what impelled him to say and do what he said and did. What did he think he was? We may let him stretch out on the couch, but we may also walk with him and ask him where he lives, John 1:38, i.e., from where does he speak? We follow this second path as a via media between experimental psychology and deductive theology, yet we know that he was rather elusive. If lives of Jesus continue to multiply uncontrollably today, is it all curiosity or a mere literary device, or is it because his figure is still inspiring both for good and for ill? Jesus remains an intriguing figure. The Western Christian and post-Christian traditions might perhaps be interested in such approaches, as the many modern novels about Jesus show, but we happen to approach the figure of Christ not with psychological curiosity or apologetic aims, or even theological intentions to resurrect Arius's ideas, for instance, but we try to approach him from the Indic perspective, which almost unconsciously asks what sort of divinely intoxicated person or what type of religious hero was that historical figure who has triggered one of the most prominent movements in the last 2 millennia. Let us not forget our context. What he did we roughly know. What he might have said we have also heard. What has come out of all this lies in front of us. It is not a legitimate question to ask simply once again who he was. We know what Christians have said concerning who he was. What did he himself think that he was? How did he bear his human consciousness? He asked about who people said that the Son of Man was. We throw back the question and ask, what do you say of yourself? Who do you say you are? Or should we be satisfied by his elusive answer to John the Baptist, Matthew 11:2-6? We should here underscore the importance of the newly emerging feminist Christologies. They offer not only a badly needed corrective to patriarchal and curiocentric interpretations, but also an essential complement to Christological studies. Is it perhaps a blasphemy to dare enter into the personal intimacy of that Christ? When all is said and done, we have still to make a final leap. It is not a merely theoretical exercise, nor an act of the will. It is an experiential and existential plunge into the depths of reality, into what Paul calls the depths, the abyss of the Godhead. Romans 8:39, Ephesians 3:18, 1 Corinthians 2:9-10. We could call it the Christian mystical experience. Christ's experience has his personal experience. If I relate it to my own personal experience, it is because I have been told about his words, so that the verbalization of my experience takes the form and uses the language that I have learned from his impact upon me. It remains nevertheless my personal experience. I do not sit silent behind his couch, nor does he stretch himself there behind me. I go to visit him in his dwelling place and we converse. I have a personal experience about my own identity. When I try to express it, I might have been influenced by what I learned, and I may use Christian or even Christ's vocabulary, and perhaps by this very fact give the impression that I pretend to reenact his experience. It is simply how I actually interpret my own experience. On the one hand, having meditated on Christ's words and deeds, they may have shaped my experience or given me the frame wherein to express it. On the other hand, the personal experience of my own identity may have found in Christ's example an image and even a model of my own personal experience. I am assuming here neither that it is His grace which made me participant in His experience, as Christian scripture suggests, nor that I have had it totally independently on my own, hypothesis non fingo. Having acknowledged this inextricable relationship, and disregarding now the question whether I am also capable of expressing my own personal experience in other languages, or whether other traditions have also shaped at least the interpretation of my experience, I shall describe my own personal identity as a hermeneutical clue to understand Christ's experience. From whatever sources we deem appropriate, we should not put aside critical awareness. When awakening to reality, when simply awakening to self-consciousness, I find myself piercing through all the layers of being which I discover as veils. These veils reveal to me the shape of what I appear to be, but conceal at the same time what I am. In this conscious pilgrimage towards the core of what I am, I do not find any ground, any resting place on anything, either in me or present to my own consciousness. I cannot identify myself with my body or with my soul or with what I am today, was yesterday, or shall be tomorrow. I discover myself above, beyond, outside, or simply different from anything I can be conscious of. My own ground is an abyss, an Abgrund, or even Ungrund. While simply I do not discover or find myself, I may or not share the conviction that because I do not come from myself, I must have come from somewhere else. This may be a legitimate logical conclusion, but it is not an experience. The experience of contingency is tangential, as the word says, not transcendent. That is, touches from tangere, touching us together, cum tangere, cannot be, by definition, the untouchable transcendence. It is rather the experience that what I am is not the creation of somebody else, nor has it an external origin, but that it shares in, is part of, that same flow which we call reality. Nobody can experience transcendence. Nobody can see God. What I truly am cannot be something that I am not. All that I have received from my parents, ancestors, culture, earth, and so on, from an evolutionistic past, or karma, or God. But what I am is surely not identical with what I have. The me, I have it, and all the rest along with it. The I am it, although I may not know what it is. This latter is not even the same question. I may have to confess that it might not have occurred to me to ask who I am if others had not prompted me to ask it, thus inciting me to search for an answer. I don't know. Self-alienation is rampant in our days. Since my youth I was given the answer that it was God who created me, but since that time, although I was not able to formulate it until later on, I had the experience that this very me was not really I. I have a me, but I am not identical with that me. My I seems to stand beyond that me, but of that I, which is in some way inseparable from my me, nothing could be said. I felt responsible for all that the me did, but not completely accountable for what this me was or is. All has been given to me, my ideas, my ways of reaching intelligibility, besides, of course, my time, space, birth, inclinations, and whatnot. No scientific answer is here sufficient. It all may be the fruit of the total evolution of the human species that has come to be me, but all this does not yet reach or uncover the I. The I is not the me, although the me uses, sometimes abuses, and other moments usurps the I. I have long meditated upon a passage from the Rig Veda 164:37. What I am I do not know. I wander secluded, burdened by my mind. When the firstborn of truth has come to me, I receive a share in that selfsame word. But a commentary here is out of question. A paradox appears. The more my me acts, the less the I is active. The more the I acts, the less the me intervenes. The explanation seems obvious. I cannot say nor know what I am because the possible predicates can never be, qua predicates, identified identified with the subject. My self-consciousness can never be totally objectified. The I is prior or superior to the knowing what or who I am. Making a long story short, I came to experience me as the thou of the I. The I moves me as a thou. The thou is the agora, the ksetra, the field of the I. My task was more to listen than to speak. I could also sense that my so-called prayer was more an allowing to be led than asking for help, more a reaction to a quandary put to me than a query presented to somebody else. To call God the thou seemed to me, with all due respect, unconvincing and egocentric. God, if at all, is the I and me the thou. Yet in moments of difficulty, of suffering, and of trial in my life, I spontaneously begin to say you, God, Father, Divinity, and of course most often Christ, my Istadevata. On a second round, as it were, the roles inverted, the intimior intimo meo of Augustine, Ibn Arabi, Thomas, Eckhart, Calvin, and so many others began to become real. My little me was not relevant, not ultimate. I discovered an echo in a cryptic sentence of Paul. It is not my me that counts. Acts 20:24. The I was elusive, but a more real self appeared, which was neither my ego nor a divine I. My true self could be neither a simple rational animal nor a divine being. A mesites, 1 Timothy 2:5, was dawning within, a mediator, not an intermediary between the infinite, whose traditional name is God, transcendence, the absolute I, and my ego, my me. To my mind and heart, of course, came all the texts which describe the indwelling of Christ in the deepest core of my being, and similar statements by great spiritual masters of other traditions. I could also personally reenact the four adverbs of the Council of Chalcedon, the theanthropy of Bulgakov, and the theosis of so many fathers of the Church. Should I say that it is the experience of divine immanence, one could call it also the Advaitic experience. The alluded mediator is Anthropos, Jesus Christ, a second Adam in whom the entire human nature is represented. 1 Corinthians 15:22 and Denzinger 6:29. I experienced the inner energy, grace, power that was my inmost self, and that made me do things which are otherwise inexplicable, although psychology can always interfere, offering explanations in two dimensions only. But I am speaking of memory and giving already too much of an interpretation. I am aware that these confessions make it easy for critics to say that I am reading into the gospel instead of decoding them objectively. Besides unearthing the fallacy of pure objectivity, I would retort that the argument turns in my favor, since the fact that a simple man like me, and so many others, could have such experiences, makes more believable that the man Jesus Christ could have had them, albeit in a far more eminent way. Omnis cognitio est par aliquam similitudinem. Thomas, Summa Theologica 1, question 14, a 11, ad 3, as is also said by Aristotle and Kant. Before we turn to the alleged insights of Jesus the Christ, let us exemplify our method by analyzing a sentence which we may suppose has been uttered by a being like me. I am an elephant who flies in the skies. At first sight, I cannot understand such a proposition. I cannot reenact the statement that I am a flying elephant, that a human being is an elephant that flies. I have to acknowledge that the sentence is unintelligible to me. True understanding of a sentence amounts to discovering the intelligibility of the sentence, i.e., to being convinced of the truth of what one understands. I am then bound to limit myself to affirming that a certain human individual, apparently in his senses, makes such a, for me, preposterous affirmation. I project my confidence on another person and trust that for her the sentence has a certain meaning hidden to me. If I still try to decipher what that person may possibly mean when making such a statement, I may come to the following conclusions. Although I have to confess that I have not myself acquired such a state of consciousness, nevertheless, having studied totemism, shamanism, and other related phenomena, I can more or less figure out that a human individual may well identify herself with an elephant, and those who have experienced the feelings and intelligence of those pachyderms may agree with me and may be able to get a kind of elephantine consciousness and truly affirm that she is also an elephant. Stretching my empathy to the utmost, I may reenact the sentence, I am an elephant, although with caution, provisos, and trepidation, because I have not abandoned my human consciousness as well. I will have to confess, however, that the proposition is not totally intelligible to me, and that I can make only some partial sense of it, though empathy with somebody whom I trust, and who says, I am an elephant. In short, I may believe that the sentence, I am an elephant, may have certain meaning for a very special human being, although I do not fully reach that level or that stage of consciousness. But the second part of the proposition is unacceptable to me. Flying in the skies. Here I will have to say that my fellow being is either dreaming or suffering an hallucination. No real elephant, I will argue, ever flies in the skies. My hero is certainly wrong in venturing such an affirmation. It is simply senseless, and with my best will and desire to believe, I will have to conclude that the man is either deceiving him, herself, or deceiving all of us. She may be a very special human being with supernatural flying powers. She may identify herself with an elephant, but not with a flying elephant, for an elephant does not fly. Furthermore, connecting the two parts of the sentence, I will come to the comforting suspicion that the first part is probably also an illusion. If my pneuma rejects both parts, my pistuma may stretch out to the first section of the sentence, but both pneuma and pistuma oblige me to reject the second part of the statement. We cannot believe what we believe is unbelievable, even though based on the authority of that Christ is God, the Church has a divine hotline, or the magisterium a superior type of knowledge, or the like. If 1,000 scriptures assure me that the fire does not burn, I will not believe them, said the Mimamsakis more than 1,000 years ago. We should distinguish between rational knowledge and other possible kinds of knowledge, as most religious traditions assert, but we cannot contradict ourselves. Belief has to be reasonable and reason believable. I may believe what I cannot understand, but I cannot believe the, for me, unbelievable. I may believe anything provided I believe it believable. Tertullian may say credo quia absurdum because he believes that the absurdum may be believable, thus upsetting the rational natural order, but we should stop here. In sum, there is no point in formulating statements if we are not able to make sense of those formulations. There is no point in saying I and the Father are one if the sentence is for us a priori meaningless, and it is meaningless if we are closed to non-sensual and non-deductible propositions, and we shall be closed to the meaning of those propositions if our life moves only on the sensual and purely rational levels, i.e., if we are insensitive to the third dimension of reality, blind to mystical awareness. No more need be said, at the risk of seeming to project this experience on Jesus Christ, or rather believing that this experience may be a shadow of Christ's experience. I approach what I consider the three Mahavakyani of Jesus the Christ. 1. Abba, Pater. The text. It is almost a moot question to ask which of the texts we shall introduce as more relevant, since everything is connected, but most probably this first group of texts could be said to be central to the entire Christian understanding. 1. Abba, Father, all things are possible to thee. Take this cup away from me, yet not what I will, but what thou wilt. Mark 14:36, also Matthew 25:39, Luke 22:42, John 12:27. Quite a revealing duplication. Abba means father, and pater means father. If Jesus spoke in Aramaic, he may not have reduplicated the word, but I imagine that Mark and his sources was impelled to do this in order to render the ambivalence of the word, on the one hand, daddy, biological father, lovable head of the family, and on the other, the more common name for the closer and less terrifying aspect of the deity in many religions, including Judaism, of course. Patriarchalism notwithstanding. After reading many documents of the ancient religions, one might wonder whether calling God Father and Mother is an anthropomorphism, or whether, on the contrary, calling the parents Father and Mother is a theomorphism. Human fellowship with the gods seems sometimes closer to primordial man than merely family relationships. The word Abba was probably kept in the first Christian liturgies to stress the special relationship with the divinity, which the word meant on the lips of Jesus. He might, as the Gospels report, have constantly pronounced it, but it appears only once verbatim. On other occasions, pater alone appears. In John we have 35 times, ho pater mo, my Father. It is important to remark that the only time in which the Aramaic word is reported on the lips of Jesus is in his almost desperate prayer at Gethsemane, pleading to be spared that time, but adding that the Father's will be done. Jesus is undoubtedly convinced that God is his Father. He speaks of God as my Father in a provocative way. Kittel says disrespectful, but for his own Jewish tradition. He refers to him as Father in the intimacy of his prayer, in jubilation, Matthew 11:25, Luke 10:21, on the cross, Luke 23:34, in exalted prayer when facing death by being stoned, John 12:27 and 28, in direct prayer to his Father, John 27:1 and 5, calling him Holy or Righteous Father, John 27:11 and 25, etc. The two other times in which the Aramaic word appears are in the epistles of St. Paul. The context is our human calling upon the Father. Abba is evocative. We are capable of doing it by the power of the Spirit in the relationship of true filiation. 2. For all who are guided by the Spirit of God are children of God. The Spirit you have received is not a spirit of serfdom leading you back into fear, but a spirit that makes us children, enabling us to cry, Abba, Father. This same Spirit joins with our spirit in testifying that we are God's children, and if children, then heirs. God's heirs and Christ's fellow heirs, since we suffer with him, so that we may be glorified also with him. Romans 8:14 through 6. When Paul sets on our lips this cry of Abba, Pater, he affirms that it is our being children of God that entitles us to utter such a cry, and adds immediately that both the divine Spirit and our spirit bear witness that God is our Father, i.e., that we are his children. It is this witnessing of our own spirit that emboldens us to speak about Jesus' Spirit. The same experience is described in the third text. 3. And because you are children, God has sent into our hearts the Spirit of his Son, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a servant, but a child, and if a child, also an heir through God. Galatians 4:6 through 7. Here is again a vital circle, a sort of perichoresis. It is because we are children that God sends his Spirit, and because God sends his Spirit, we are his children. Christian theology has seen in Christ the cause of our filiation, the interpretation. Two fundamental ideas emerge from those texts. Jesus calls God his Father and empowers his disciples to do the same by virtue of the inner working of the indwelling divine Spirit. What does it mean? First of all, it means what it says within the Jewish tradition of that time, which echoes the entire Semitic world of the two previous millennia. God is Father, and Father means begetter, educator, protector, ruler, lover. This belongs undoubtedly to a patriarchal culture which we may and should criticize, but precisely because of this patriarchalism, the word has an inclusive meaning as giver of life. Purified from its anthropomorphic underpinnings, it can be interpreted as denoting source, origin, foundation, as later tradition will understand the word Father when using it in the Trinitarian doctrine. It has little to do with gender or sex. But secondly, and strikingly, since the very beginning, as his contemporaries noticed, Jesus stresses that God is his Father, his daddy, in such an intimate manner that Christian tradition affirms that Jesus of Nazareth had no other father. Whether we can reconcile our sentence with the existence of another purely human father, not in competition with the divine Father, is not our concern. We are only trying to understand Jesus' experience. To be sure, Jesus seems to have had a very special experience of his divine sonship. The numerous texts in which Christ refers to his Father are so well attested and have been so thoroughly investigated that we do not need to elaborate further on this. Jesus calls God his Father. Only one remark seems pertinent at this point. The father-son relation is so intimate that we slide either into an anthropomorphic idea of God, God is the father of man, or a theomorphic image of man, man is the son of God. Classical theologies underscore the former. God is a transcendent father, more contemporary Christologies the latter. Man is an immanent son. The two other texts are also relevant, although they have sometimes been marginalized in comparison with the first. We do not wish to argue now whether teknon, child, and Hios, son, means the same, or whether the hyothesia of Romans 8:15 means adoption as a legal form, fictio iorius, or may have another less legalistic meaning. At any rate, the texts explicitly tell us that we may also share in Christ's filiation to the Father. The texts make plain that Christ is the cause, the head of the body, the reason why we also share divine nature. 2 Peter 1:4. These two latter texts are not reported as Jesus' words, but they show the central message of Christ as understood by a qualified disciple of Jesus. If Jesus truly calls God his Father, those who have received his Spirit have the same power of calling God their Father. They have been adopted as children with the same rights. This can only be the case if Jesus is understood to be our brother. Brothers are those who have the same Father. Needless to remember that calling does not mean naming in a merely nominalistic sense. Every call, active or passive, amounts to an empowering. Romans 9:12, Hebrews 5:4, 1 Corinthians 1:9, etc. The power of the name, and of naming, of course, has weakened in modern consciousness. In a word, if Christ calls God his Father, we too can reenact this experience by the gift of the Spirit. Romans 8:9. If we both, Christ and us, call God our Father, we may then try to understand what Jesus said. The experience. I venture the following description, salva reverentia. You divine mystery whom my own people call Father, you are truly the direct origin, the begetter of what I am. You are the source from which I proceed. I sense that your life passes through me, that my life does not proceed from me, but from a source which gives me not only life in general, but also words, ideas, inspiration, and all what I am. What I speak is always somewhat heard. If I were born in an Apuroseia tradition, I could as well have said that I experience the very language of things and situations, that I can hear what they say. But as I belong to a monotheistic people, I express that experience by saying that through them, things and events, I discover your voice and your will. Peter surmised it, and that's why I blessed him, he told me. Thou art, you are. And then he felt the need of adding some attributes belonging to the culture of his people. Son of the living God, anointed, etc. This was too exclusively linked with Jewish culture, and I told him not to proclaim it. In the language of later centuries, I could say that I experienced the creatio continua, or rather the constant generatio. I am being constantly begotten, created, sustained, given life, inspired, by that invisible mystery which people call God, and picture in the most diverse ways. Today you have been begotten was what I heard at the Jordan and on Mount Tabor, and the word son still reverberates in my ears. In saying this, I am stressing an intimate and constitutive relation, but nevertheless a hierarchical one. You are the Father, I am the Son. You are the source, I am the river of living waters gushing forth from you. Without you, nothing. I have learned obedience the hard way, as Paul rightly suspected, or whoever wrote Hebrews 8:7-9. There is difference between us. Only you are good. It is not my will that counts. I do not even know your plans. I have the clear consciousness that my task is a historical one, as I will have to go away and back to you. Although I was unwilling to be called a prophet, I feel that the common sense of the people was not mistaken when they ascribed to me a historical role to perform, or put in less theistic language, that my personal calling was that of doing something for my fellow beings and for the universe at large. I had a unique task to perform, and at the end of my short life I could cry that I had done it. As for the rest, into your hands I entrusted my spirit. Does all this make sense to us? Yes, it does. If in one way or another we could not reenact what those words convey, the entire talk about Jesus would be a futile exercise and barren speculation, except perhaps for a conscious or unconscious desire to manipulate Jesus' figure in order to create or maintain a power structure based on that lofty figure. But we have to confess, and we are not alone in this confession, that we find those words pregnant with eternal life, because we can truly have a similar experience. Perhaps influenced by his own polemic words in response to the Jews, "Ye are gods," John 10:34, quoting Psalm 32:6, the Christian tradition has often told us, "Ye are Christ's, alter Christus," or as I would dare say, ipse Christus, following the doctrine of Paul. Have the same sentiment among you which was in Christ Jesus. Philippians 2:5, says Paul in an untranslatable phrase, "Tutto froniete, hoc sentite," renders the Vulgate. Mind, AV, RV, attitude, NAB, bearings, NEB, share in the same intellectual experience, in the same intelligence or insights than Jesus the Christ. This is the experience we are invited to perform. It makes sense to me, and I am able to reenact that experience, or rather to formulate my own experience using that language, although I may be also capable of speaking other languages. Abba, Pater, I am not the source of my own being. I am pure gift. I have received all that I am, including what I call my I. Everything is grace. I surely experience contingency, to use a philosophical concept. I do not find in me my own foundation, the reason of my life. There is still more. Not only do I discover experientially my own contingency, I equally experience that it all comes from you, a mysterious source, which many have substantiated it as a supreme being. To call you Father certainly means a filial relationship. It means the experience of being begotten, of emerging, as it were, from a source and sharing its nature. It is the water of the source which flows down the river. It is not a different water, yet it does not necessarily mean that there is a substance which is, and besides being, also functions as Father. The very name Father is a function, not a substance. The Father fathers. My Father is not a being which, besides his many activities, also gives birth to me. He has no other activity than this one. It is my Father who fathers me. It is about this experience of being fathered, begotten, produced, given birth that I am speaking, and not about somebody else. I am neither substantializing nor projecting into the past something that is an experience, and thus can only be of the present, nor am I personifying. I rather experience it as the fons et origo totius divinitatis, to quote the councils of Toledo, as the theotes, to echo St. Paul, hapax legomenon, Colossians 2:9, as the silence, sige, out of which the word came, to follow St. Irenaeus. I also know other expressions, although I would not use them, causa sui, das ganz andere, ens a se, etc. Undoubtedly, if I were born in another time and culture, I would have called you mother, and the metaphor would have been probably more powerful and certainly more immediate. I also feel that this is not my exclusive privilege. Every human being has you as father. Every being is fathered by you, the fountainhead of everything. Truly, we are not orphans. We exist because we exist, proceed from such an infinite source which is not pinned down by any name, or as one mystic said, you are sunder namen, nameless. über alle Namen, above all names, innominabilis, unnameable, and omninominabilis, named by everything. Having stated the relativity of the formulation, I may still dedicate a paragraph to the appropriateness of the Abba, Pater. First of all, it is evocative, and the three passages where it occurs all tell us of extreme situations, of a cry, a shout, a prayer, accompanied even by the shedding of blood. It is a spontaneous outburst of joy, of suffering, or of hope. It is not the literary style of the third person, of the narrative about others or past situations. Nothing short of a personification will satisfy human nature when in extreme situations it experiences the bottomless life of the creature. We need to personify, and Istadevata is the most human way to deal with that dimension of the human experience. To find the adequate divine icon for us, we need a divine person. This is not all. Father stands not only for source, power, and person, it stands also for protection, and specially for love. In the deepest recesses of my human awareness, I discover not just love in myself, but that I am capable of loving precisely because I am loved. Human love is a response. Love has been bestowed on me. I am capable of loving because I have been loved. I am not always identifying the source and the love, but I experience love as my attraction towards a source, and I experience at the same time that the love with which I am loved has also been received. I am not making arguments with love as people are prone to make with reason, but I can well experience that the source of everything is also the origin of love. I experience once again, although often on a minor scale, the cited perichoresis. Sometimes I do not respond to the same person with the same love with which I am loved, but I pass it on, as it were, to a third person. I may not have responded adequately to the love of my parents, spouse, or friend, but I lavish that love on my children, to put an example. The dance goes on. A current of love circulates through the three worlds. Thirdly, the Father combines in a unique way power and love, two ultimate ingredients of the universe. The Father is immensely superior to the Son. He is the protector. And as already said, the symbol Father stands equally for Mother, giver of life, existence, nurture, and love. This symbol stands at the same time for equality, sharing, participating in the same venture. The Son is equal to the Father, and this equality is felt even more if the Father is Mother. And again, Son here is our patriarchal language, for it indicates simply the offspring, the daughter as much as the boy. Abba, Pater, means both superiority and equality. In short, I can certainly reenact the Abba, Pater, man is not an orphan, the earth is her mother, the heaven is her father, as many ancient and primordial traditions assert. I can read the story of the man of Galilee in a way in which I discover in what an eminent way he realized this experience, to what extent he felt the nearness and, at the same time, the distance between Father and Son. If mysticism tells us about the experience of the ultimate reality, the mysticism of Jesus the Christ is the experience of that equality and difference with the giver of life, the source of the universe. Abba, Pater, every man is a child, and we may now understand his saying about the children and the kingdom of heaven. Those who really undergo the Father experience are not precisely the parents, and most theologies commenting on this passage betray, as I have until now, an adult experience. It is not the father who says, Father, it is the child who shouts and sings and cries, Father. And here the capital case is proper. It is not just a sentiment of dependence or of love. It is rather a primordial feeling of belonging. For this reason, we may as well, or even better, say mother, what the historical Jesus could certainly not say. To make this experience, we do not need to be scribes or Pharisees, learned or religious. We need simply to have been children. Not everyone is a father or mother, but everybody has been a child. There is but one point in which my experience, if it does not differ, surely qualifies the old and venerable expression. And saying this, I voice the feeling of many of my contemporaries, including Christians. I am encouraged by Christ's example of not freezing tradition and impelling us to continue and deepen his task. Our third group of texts. Creation is not a finished product, and yet I am saying it hesitatingly. I can pray and believe in Abba Pater, but with a similar suffering and pain with which, it is reported, you prayed it at Gethsemane. The word Father is blurred in our present-day lives. Patriarchalism is bad, but the destruction of the family without any substitution is worse, and we are also all too aware of the difficulties involved in a pious discourse regarding a loving and almighty Father who allows the immense tragedies of all times and those of our technocratic period in an increased way. I am quite relieved when I discover that the old formula credo in unum patrem omnipotentem does not correspond to your experience. You experienced almost the opposite in the garden and excruciatingly on the cross. Matthew 27:46, Mark 15:34. I experience your fatherhood, but not your almighty power, your all-might. How could your almighty power allow all this, and all the efforts at an answer seem similar to the response that God reveals the Trinity just to humble our intelligence? I cannot believe all these theologumena. Abba Pater is an excruciating prayer, indeed, but not a dehumanizing one. But there is more. Here perhaps other cultures have shaped my experience. I can understand our need for personification, but not the anthropomorphism of the personalistic interpretation of the Divine Father figure. Abba Pater represents for me neither the belief in an other, substantial being, nor, and much less, the belief in my embellished self, neither dualism, you over there and we down here, nor monism, an all-swallowing God, or an alone-standing self-sufficient man. Here is where your expression, my Father, becomes full of life. The Father belongs to the I am, that I also am. In this awareness I overcome the naive belief that my Father is all-powerful, besides other philosophical aparias of the same notion. And this is not yet all. The designs of my Father are inscrutable because there is not a super-divine intellect which has planned beforehand the destiny of the universe. My Father is my Father being my Father, and being the Father of all, not being an independent engineer who has calculated, or miscalculated according to some, the destiny of the universe. Neither mathematics nor logic are above the divine mystery which you called the Father. This first experience, however it might be qualified and modified with the following text, which stresses equality and the same nature with the Father, is irretrievable and definitive as much as the second one. Human consciousness may reach a supreme stage, as some mystics may claim, but even then, when that consciousness reverberates on human shores, we humans are those who speak of infinite consciousness. It shows an infinite difference from the source. This is precisely the experience of the Trinity. The self-identity of each person is so perfect and absolute that there is no neutral place where diversity could appear. Hence difference is also infinite. Pantheism is not the answer. 2. I and the Father are one. The text. Just as the first utterance was not a unique sentence, but the expression of a repeatedly expressed conviction, this second statement also pervades the entire message of Jesus, his equality with the Father, along with the many qualifications the Gospel writers or he himself may have introduced. We should mention here the interest of a certain tradition, as well as of modern exegetes, in severing the synoptics from John's Gospel. Our concern is not with the ipsissima verba, but with the complex figure of Christ as understood not only by the first generations, but by the Christians up to our present times, i.e. by the Church. I insist, either the Christian believers have projected on the figure of Jesus Christ their desires, anxieties, and expectations, either they are victims of a hallucination, mild as it may be, because the man Jesus was not what they imagined him to be, or that man offers a real ground for Christian belief. To repeat, either these sentences make sense for us today, or they are said by an elephant flying in the skies. It should be acceptable if it were a question of God uttering incomprehensible sentences, but then Christ would be just a divine avatara and not a real man. Among the many quotations we adduce only three: ego kai ho pater en esmen, ego et pater unum sumus. I and my Father are one. A.V. John 1030. The immediate context of this Mahavakya is enlightening. It depicts a heated dispute, even if it may have been reported and rearranged later. After he had pronounced that statement, the Jews wanted to stone Jesus, and stoning was unto death. The issue is of life and death. We will not describe the context of the entire passage. One comment only. Jesus does not dilute the issue. On the contrary, he does not minimize the answer. He maximizes it by daring a blasphemous exegesis of a Hebrew psalm, 32:6. You are gods. It is all epitomized in the finale of the dispute when he declares that his works should serve as a manifestation of the truthfulness of his words. We are challenged to accept the witness of the works and recognize that in me est pater et ego in patre nu vulgat. Pater in me est et ego in patre vulgat. The Father is in me and I in the Father. John 10:38. In another germane text, this unity is extended to all those who shall believe in him. May they all be one as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, so also may they be in us, that they may be one as we are one, I in them, and thou in me. May they be perfectly one. John 27:21 through 23. This is already an introduction to our second text. Tu, ho herakos eme eraken ton petera. Que vidit me vidit, et patrem vulgat. Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. NRSV, NAB, John 14:9. If the first context is full of danger and dialectics, this one is full of sorrow and melancholy. It belongs to the so-called last sayings of Jesus, his testament and farewell discourse. After so much talk about the Father, Philip dares to ask to be shown the Father. The answer also has a sad tone. So long a time I am with you, Philip, and you have not known me? He does not say, I have been already a long time with you speaking about the Father. How is it that you still do not know him? He does not say him, but me. Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father, NEB. Therefore you have not seen me, the text explains it further. Don't you believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? John 14:10. Our point is that these affirmations made sense for Jesus, or for those who since the very beginning put them on the lips of Jesus, and for countless generations thereafter. As the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so he who eats me shall live because of me. NEB, John 6:57. The context here is the Eucharistic dispute. The unity between Jesus and his Father is extended to all who will participate Eucharistically with him. We leave aside one of the most famous utterances of the Johannine Jesus, ego eimi, ego sum, I am, John 8:58, which echoes the traditional self-description of Yahweh in Exodus 3:14, I am who I am. Another polemical I am comes at the climax of Jesus' trial, Luke 22:70, and the I sentences of Jesus have been closely scrutinized. We also pass over that other elusive sentence which Jesus gave when directly asked who he was, John 8:25, and which is difficult to translate. Important as the ego eimi statements are, we prefer to leave them out in order not to indulge in theological discussions. The interpretation. A more animistic and less individualistic interpretation of these texts might be very helpful, but we want to limit ourselves to our attempt at being able to reenact the experience behind those words. What appears clearly in those words is the traditional perichoresis, which here is not reduced to the intra-Trinitarian realm, but extended to all creation. Is there anything outside the Trinity? The text seems to say that there is a current, a life, one is prone to read, which transits from the Father to Christ and to all who commune with him. From a monotheistic perspective, the radical separation between the human and the divine seemed threatened by those blasphemous confessions. This was Christ's challenge. The first Christian thinkers understood it well. God becomes man in order that man become God. There is a bridge, and the bridge can be crossed over. This man seems to say that the abyss between the human and the divine does not exist. Probably because of this, he eliminated fear and preached love. We have already cited the phrase of Psalm 32:6, "You are gods." Besides the politeness of some modern translations of the first text, which revert the order of the sentence and the inclusion of the possessive because of the context, we may remark the use of the plural in the verb. The text does not say, "I am one with the Father." The sentence does not say, "I am equal with the Father," or "equal to," but "I and the Father are equal. We are one." There is an irreducible we, an ultimate I and Father. There is Father and Son. They are different, i.e., Father and Son. The Father is Father, the Son is Son, to be sure. The Father is Father, or rather is the Son's Father, because he fathers, and the Son is such because he is the Father's Son. In a word, there is identity and difference. The difference is Father and Son. The identity is that one, hen unum. We should make a simple but momentous remark. Properly speaking, we should not have used the current language which says difference. Father and Son are certainly not identical, but they are not different either. They could be different only over against a common ground which allows for the difference from each other, but this is only the case if we substantialize both, make of both two substances which obviously would then be different. If we take the Abba experience in its depth, the Father is Father and nothing else, and so the Son is nothing but Son. Neither Father nor Son are substances. Father and Son are not different, they are correlates. The one implies the other, and there is not the one without the other. Here the expression "my Father" acquires its most profound meaning. He had received the retort, "Our father is Abraham." John 8:39. He answered, "If God were your Father, you would love me." John 8:42. You would understand that the power comes from the Father. John 5:19. The expression "my Father" corresponds to the controversial monogenes unigenitus, John 1:14 and 18, 3:16 and 18, 1 John 4:9, and should be related to the controversy about the prototokos primogenitus. Of course, neither expression is used by Jesus. We may interpret it not as an exclusive, but as an exhaustive sonship. Jesus is not an only son as offspring of a father who could have had many children, but as the ever-being born, semper nascens, as Eckhart would say, from the Father. In this sense, the Son can only be one, because the Father is constantly begetting him. Many a controversy and misunderstanding would have been avoided if this interpretation had been taken into consideration. What concerns us here is the immediate awareness of correlations without which we may easily misunderstand this and other texts. There is a source of my being, and even a mysterious source of being. But this origin is only such because it originates. The Father is Father because it fathers. The Son is Son because it is begotten. There are two poles of one reality, yet that reality is nothing but the relation between the two. The experience. I experience that I live because of that link. It is the link of life. I experience that this life has not been bestowed upon me. It has made me so that it is me. And I can say my life, as Christ said, my Father. As the Father has life in himself, so also he has granted Edoken to the Son to have life in himself. John 5:26. We share life as the source, and the rivers share water. We are water, and as long as the water flows, I am not the source, but the water of the source. This experience is far from pantheism, which would be a merely conceptual interpretation of that experience. I am water, but my water is not your water. Water is a mere concept, and all is water, a mere abstraction. Each water is unique, and the higher the water, we could say, stretching the simile, the more different from the common denominator, water. Not all thinking is an algebra of concepts. Let me try my own words. I and the Father are one in the measure that my ego disappears, and my ego disappears to the degree that it allows itself to be shared by anyone who comes to me, eats me, or seeing me does not see me, but what I say, or rather what I am. This happens when I have that transparency, which is all the more pure the more I am rid of my little self. When my ego is obtrusive, People clash with me and often meet only their own projections, what they already expect to be and imagine they are. My ego is like a wall against which they rebound. When I am transparent, I am fearless and truly myself. Myself. Transparency allows for a spontaneity that flows from me only when I am pure. I experience the poverty in spirit precisely in this way. The reign of the heavens is mine when I possess nothing for myself. Blessed are the poor in spirit, Matthew 5:3, is not a statement about economics. It is the invitation to discover that the entire universe is mine, or rather me, when there is no me, no ego to disturb this belonging. That the pure of heart shall seek God expresses the same experience, Matthew 5:8. The Beatitudes are neither doctrines nor moral advice nor injunctions. They are the celebration of the most intimate awareness that if I do not want anything for my selfish ego, I have everything and am everything. I am one with the source when I, too, act like a source, allowing all that I receive to flow out like Jesus. Certainly the person who listens to me hears my voice, sees my face, reads my thoughts, and suffers all my limitations. But it sometimes happens that someone hears through my voice, sees through my face, perceives beyond my thoughts, and gets an insight behind my clumsiness. He who really sees, I would dare say, sees already the Father, the mystery, reality. This is only possible if this intimate union is not selfish, not egotistically preserved, but shared in communion, service, and love. Are not those experiences more frequent than it might appear? Christ did come, not so much to teach doctrines, but to communicate life, experience, John 10:10, ultimately to communicate himself, his own life, that of the Father. I do not deny that he had those experiences in such a degree that my own insights fade away as pale imitations, but we do not need to play the humble-minded and the sinner in order that he may appear the saint and the divine. I even sense that Jesus does not like those attitudes. Ego dixi dii estis, as already quoted, Psalm 82:6, John 10:34. Why then should we not feel entitled to speak like a god? Personal dignity implies that we are not just one of the many rings in the lifeless chain of entities, even of being, but that each one of us is unique, irreplaceable, because of infinite value, divine. I insist that none of those experiences are foreign or inaccessible to us. We truly understand what he was talking about, and now what we said at the beginning may become more plausible, that even if we cannot be sure that our man of Galilee had uttered such words, we have heard them in our hearts. That message pervades our life and reveals the ultimate experience of the human being. Should I quote not a sentimental mystical writer, but Thomas Aquinas? If Christ would have entrusted his doctrine to writing, people would imagine that there is nothing else in his doctrine than what Scripture contains. All this is not at all demeaning for a symbol which claims to have reached the supreme kenosis. This is not deification in a mythological manner. It is rather the sober and sense awareness that the indwelling of the divine mystery is not imagination, that I am participating in the cosmotheandric adventure of reality. And again, this does not at all deny that this supreme human experience, that of being a vessel of infinitude, can be expressed differently by other traditions. Are we not saying, after all, that Jesus Christ is the revelation of the infinite mystery hidden in the cosmos since times eternal? Romans 16:25-26. Even if I am far away from being Eucharist, bread of life for others, and very slow to realize that whoever comes in contact with me enters into communication with the very source of life, which veritably gives life to me and all others, or still so opaque that not everyone who sees me sees the Father, I cannot deny that all those experiences are my experiences, and within the reach of any human being. Might not precisely this be the truly good news? I and the Father are one. How else could it be? The Father is not a supreme being who accidentally lets his sperm beget some children so that they may also exist. The Father is nothing but Father, i.e., fathering. If he would disappear, I also would be annihilated, as so many Christian thinkers said. We have already dispelled the fear of pantheism. recognizing that our differences are infinite, as in the Trinity, our oneness with God, our divine character, as Christian tradition was fond of saying, does not constitute an undiscriminated fusion, and yet it does not allow for separation either. The source is not me, but it is not separated nor separable from me. We made a passing reference to the scholastic creatio continua, which liberates us from living in a fixed and unfree universe. We may also mention other experience which is difficult to communicate, because both words and thoughts recoil, as an Upanishad affirms. It could be expressed within the atmosphere of Meister Eckhart as incarnatio continua, but perhaps silence is most fitting at this juncture. When I react against being called a human being, or when I am critical of evolutionistic thinking and claim to be a man, just man, it is not that I do not include women in man, or do not recognize the merits of the Darwinistic hypothesis. It is that I react against the epidemic of modern superficiality, which tends to obscure one of the most central human experiences, that of being unique, divine, center of reality, constitutively linked with the source of all, a microcosm reflecting the entire macrocosm, in a word, one with the Father, infinite, incomparable, not interchangeable. The I is not the me. I am not just the product of evolution, a speck of dust or mind in the middle of an immense universe. In sum, I am not a member of a classification, I am the classifier, and this is also the case, obviously, for everyone and everything. The dignity of man consists precisely in being aware of it. I and the Father are one, and that is what the mediator, Anthropos Christos Jesus, 1 Timothy 2:5, dared to say. 3. I should go. The text. 1. Nevertheless, I tell you the truth. It is for your good that I am leaving you. If I do not go, your advocate will not come. Whereas, if I go, I will send him to you. N.E.B. We do not need to linger on the scene, even though it is very moving, and might have been constructed afterwards. It is nevertheless a human and all too human situation. The future does not look bright. His followers will be persecuted, and the pervading mood among his disciples is that he is leaving rather abruptly, without having achieved anything, almost abandoning them. One could understand Judas's frustration and despair. Jesus' mission is ending as a total fiasco. He has not provided for anything durable or left any institution. He neither baptized nor ordained, nor much less founded anything, although he might have stated his intention of doing so. He sent them away like sheep among wolves, and even at the end refuses to change his tactics. The wolves are having it. Only one thing he promises, the Spirit. We need not delve into the meaning of that polysemic verb, symphero, which literally means to bring together, gather, collect, and in this particular case has the meaning of being profitable, advantageous, expedient, and fits with the entire situation. His life is coming to an end. Yes, he is going to the Father, John 14:12, 16:17, and 28, 20:17, etc. Still he is going away. He consoles them, saying that he is not leaving them orphans, John 14:18, but he clearly states that they will no longer see him, and the ghost of his oncoming death is present all the time. He promises them consolation, comfort, an intercessor, a mediator, a helper, a paraclete. In other texts, this advocate is described as the Spirit, and is often called the Spirit of Truth, John 14:17, 26, 15:26, 16:13, etc., perhaps recalling the language of the Qumran community. However, when he comes, who is the Spirit of Truth, he will guide you into all the truth. N.E.B., John 16:13. The text cannot be more explicit. Once he goes, the Spirit of Truth will come and introduce us into the entire truth. Is this naive trust in man or blind confidence in the Spirit? Jesus is supposed to have also said that it is the Spirit who gives life. Spiritus est qui vivificat. John 6:63, although some exegetes may prefer to contextualize this saying within the Eucharistic discussions. 3. Whoever believes in me will perform even greater works, because I am going to the Father. NJB. John 14:12. We recall the theological distinctions traditionally employed in order not to allow the disciple to surpass the master, although this text seems to affirm that this is the case. Nevertheless, the statement suggests that we are only at the beginning of a new dispensation, and that our task is to set it forth in a creative and even more wondrous way. But we return to the sentiments of Jesus when he said those words, or gave occasion to his first disciples to put those sentences in his mouth. The interpretation. The traditional interpretation of the entire last discourse of Jesus is well known. Jesus seems to be conscious of his mission and responsibility. The farewell talk gives hints of the Trinity and the Church, and contains an undeniable example of the climate of the first Christian generations. Christians would be hardly understandable without those chapters. Modern scholarship has done wonders in filtering layers of redaction and scrutinizing the possible historical happenings that gave rise to this text. But there is no denying that in one way or another the promise of the Spirit seems to belong to the kerygma of Jesus. But our concern is different. We are interested in understanding the man capable of making those utterances, and we are trying to do this by examining whether we may be able to reenact the experience behind those words. It may be true that the first Christian generations believed that the Son of God, wanting to establish his church and conscious of fulfilling a role given by his divine Father, made that wonderful speech that the Gospels narrate. It could be interpreted as the climax of his teaching. But even if this were the case, we also realize that the attitude reflected in this text is typical of the man of Galilee. He preached by his example, hence, instead of visualizing a triumphalistic mise en scene by the later Christian communities in which Jesus seems to be overly confident about his church, we may understand those words as the narrative of a realistic situation that shatters all idealistic expectations. Jesus seems to have failed and missed every opportunity to establish his church. The enthusiastic crowds wanted to make him king. He went away. The apostles wanted to keep him on the mountain. He scolded them and descended to the plains. Satan wanted to offer him all the kingdoms of the world. He refused. He did not even want to listen to Scripture and convert the stones into his own food, but preferred that the stones remain stones. He was certainly not a diplomat, able to endear himself to the authorities.